Go ahead and get that going. Hi, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon to you, depending on where you are. Welcome to NCST's December Community Impact Briefing. We're just giving folks a little time to come on in and join us. All right. Feel like I should be doing some caroling or something like that, but we'll have 2 more minutes. We'll keep letting some folks in. And then we'll get started here.
I've seen some Zooms where they have a snow feature to it, so we'll have to see if we can get that going for the next winter CIB call.
Personally, I prefer if we would have had some Luther Vandross to fill the space.
There you go.
You can't go wrong with Luther.
What a voice.
Mm-hmm.
Once again, welcome everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're coming in from. Thanks for joining us today. We have a fantastic speaker and presentation for you, and something near and dear to lots of our hearts around property tax justice. So hopefully you're here for that. It's going to be fantastic, and we welcome you. So thank you for being here. All right. Another minute. Okay. That is my cue. We're at 12:33. All right. So we will continue to watch folks coming in, but I have just the honor and privilege today to introduce. So first of all, let me tell you who I am. Welcome. I'm Raquel Reddy, and the Managing Director of Community Development here at NCST. Thanks for being here with us. I also have my colleague, Elizabeth Coates, who's the Director of our Homeownership Alliance. And we have our wonderful presenter, Professor Bernadette Atuahene, and her Chief of Staff, AJ Braverman, with us. So we're going to get started in just a second, but I would like to just let folks know you can definitely, as we're going through the presentation, feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A or the chat. We are recording this session, so you probably got a note that to agree to that. So we'll have this up on our website in the next 24 to 48 hours for you as well. But please, I would love to just give you a little bit of background on one. Our topic for today, of course, is property tax justice. So we are going to be talking about the impact of inequitable tax assessments on homeowners and neighborhoods, as well as the National Coalition for Property Tax Justice that was founded by Professor Atuahene. We'll be going through lots of different updates, and you please pay attention to the chat. We'll be dropping some links in there as well for your convenience. But please just indulge me with a minute or so here so I can provide a background for you on Professor Bernadette Atuahene. Sorry, I've been practicing this like for 30 minutes. Sorry, Atuahene. Who is a property law scholar focusing on land stolen from people in the African diaspora. She's the daughter of Ghanaian immigrants who grew up in Los Angeles and attended UCLA for college. She then earned her JD from Yale and her MPA from Harvard. After completing her graduate studies, she served as a judicial clerk at the Constitutional Court of South Africa and then practiced as an associate at Cleary, Gottlieb, Steen, and Hamilton in New York. Professor Atuahene also held the inaugural James E. Jones Chair position at the University of Wisconsin Law School. Professor Atuahene has worked as a consultant for the World Bank and the South African Land Claims Commission, and she has also directed and produced an award-winning short documentary film about one South African family's struggle to regain their land. She has been honored with Fulbright Fellowship, Council on Foreign Relations International Affairs Fellowship, and Princeton's Law and Public Affairs Fellowship as well. Her first book, We Want What's Ours, Learning from South Africa's Land Restitution Program, is based on 150 interviews she conducted with South Africans dispossessed of their land by the colonial and apartheid government, and who received some form of compensation post-apartheid. Professor Atuahene won a National Science Foundation Award for her current project about racialized property tax administration in Detroit, which has received several accolades, including the Law and Society Association's John Hope Franklin Award for Best Paper on Race in 2020. In addition to publishing 2 New York Times op-eds and appearing on the national news shows, such as Democracy Now! And the Tavis Smiley Show, to discuss her work in Detroit, she has also published academic articles in journals such as California Law Review, Northwestern Law Review, and Southern Conference Law Review. What a fantastic background and so much to offer during our presentation today. With that, please, I'd love to welcome Professor Atuahene to the December Community Impact Briefing as our presenter. Thank you.
Raquel, thank you so much for all that you do. And NCST has been such great partners in this work. And thank you for this opportunity to present to your constituency. So I moved recently from University of Wisconsin, and now I'm back home in Los Angeles. So I'm now at USC Law School back home in LA. But of course, I do ethnographic work, so I live in the place I study. So I'm currently here in my research home in Detroit, and I'm living now between Detroit and Los Angeles is the only update to the bio. All right, let's get to it. So we have a situation in Detroit where since 2009, 1 in 3 properties has completed the property tax foreclosure process. 1 in 3. We haven't seen this number of property tax foreclosures in American history since the Great Depression. All right. So we activists on the ground, just like Hurricane Katrina came in and decimated New Orleans, we're calling this a hurricane without water. Because again, just like the Hurricane Katrina decimated New Orleans, this property tax foreclosure crisis has decimated entire neighborhoods in Detroit. Just to give you a visual, every red dot here is a house that has gone through property tax foreclosure. And here's the view at the block level. Here's the view at the neighborhood level. And this is what it looks like at the city level. Right? There are very few neighborhoods that have gone untouched by this property tax foreclosure crisis in Detroit. So the question is, what is going on in Detroit where they're having so many property tax foreclosures, where, you know, a lot of people after the Great Recession, we had a big mortgage foreclosure crisis, which is when the bank takes your home away from you. But this is really unique in terms of the number of property tax foreclosures, which is when the government takes your property from you for your failure to pay property taxes. All right, part of the story is actually connected with the Great Recession. Because, you know, because of the irresponsibility of the banks and predatory lending, we had Black and brown, you know, there was a dip, obviously, in home prices nationally, but Black and brown communities took a precipitous dive because of the predatory lending. And as you can see here in Detroit, those prices never recovered. And this is the very same time that Detroit is going through the largest municipal bankruptcy in US history. And so it just does not have the capacity to adjust the home values, which have changed dramatically, right? And so this is part of the story, is the irresponsibility of the banks and the predatory lending is part of the story in Detroit. To make sure you can follow my presentation, I'm just gonna, you know, I want you to understand how the property tax bill is calculated in Michigan. The first is the taxable value, or, you know, the assessed value, which is derived from the assessed value, minus qualifying exemptions like the poverty tax exemption. We have an exemptions for seniors and veterans like most jurisdictions do, times the property tax rate, and that's how you get your property tax liability. That's how you get your property tax bill. That's how it's calculated. Now, before I started my work, there was a lot of work done on the property tax rate in Detroit, which is one of the highest in America and the highest in Michigan. And there had also been a lot of work done on assessment and equity by economists in Michigan State and urban planners at the University of Michigan. But before I started my work, no one was really looking at the issue of illegality, because the Michigan state constitution is quite clear. No property can be assessed at more than 50% of its market value. Other state constitutions say things like property tax assessments must be fair, uniform, equal. These are all nebulous standards up to a judge to determine legality. Because Michigan has a ratio, no more than 50% of the property's market value, it means people like me can come in and crunch the numbers to determine legality, and that's precisely what we did, right? And our findings were absolutely shocking. So using the most conservative estimates possible, because we knew this was contentious, and so we wanted to, again, use the most conservative estimates such that if anyone redid our study, their estimates could only go higher, right? And so we are able to say that between 2009 and 2015, in each of those 7 years, anywhere between 55 and 85% of properties were being assessed in violation of the Michigan state constitution, okay? And then when we actually broke the data up into what we call 5 quintiles, quintile 1 and 2 being the lowest valued homes, right, up into quintile 5 being the highest valued homes, we're able to say that in quintile 1 and 2, 95% or more of the properties were being assessed in violation of the Michigan state constitution. But when we got to quintile 5, it was less than 20%. So this means that the burden of these unconstitutional property tax assessments are being borne by the most vulnerable homeowners, the homeowners in the lowest valued homes. All right, so what a lot of people who follow national news and especially are following what's going on in Detroit, they know that Detroit, again, as I mentioned earlier, had the largest municipal bankruptcy in US history. But what people don't know is that and they know that an emergency manager came in and took over from the democratically elected city council here in Detroit. But what people don't know is that at that very same time, because of this rampant illegality I'm describing to you, the state took over Detroit's assessment division as well. And they didn't get back full control of their assessment division until 2017, because at the top of the year, they finally completed a parcel by parcel reassessment of every property in the city. And so after they did that, the University of Chicago Center for Municipal Finance did what's called the assessment ratio study that I did that I just told you about. We did initially. So they wanted to see how did it go. And the good news is through the middle, things got better. But for the lowest valued homes, as you can see here in this chart, things did not get better after 2017, after the parcel by parcel reassessment. The vast majority of the lowest valued homes were still being assessed in violation of the Michigan state constitution, even after this attempted fix. All right, so this is a term I'm going to use over and over, and it's called regressive, right? And so that means Detroit is regressive, and that just means that the lower valued homes are taxed at a higher rate than the higher valued homes. As you can see here in this image, that's exactly what's going on in Detroit, all right? So regressivity means that the lowest valued homes are taxed at a higher rate than the higher valued homes. And I'm going to be using this term over and over, so I want to make sure everyone is following me and understands what it means. All right, so as a result of this massive theft, and that's what we need to call it, which is a massive theft of these overassessments, a Detroit News investigative series has estimated, again, through the most conservative estimate possible, is that Detroit has stolen over $600 million from its residents due to these overassessments. And I always like to pause and just applaud the journalist who did this report, because we academics had been churning out studies, churning out reports, but these reporters did 2 things in particular. Number one, as you saw, my study looked at was saying this is the percent of homes that are illegal. But what these journalists did, they say, what you need to do is to say you need to individualize the harm. And that was my first lesson in terms of how to use data to reach people. So what they did is they they made an app on their website when this story came out that allowed homeowners in Detroit to plug in their address to find out how much they were individually overtaxed. And my God, talk about an explosion. Again, we had been knocking on this door, yelling from the rooftops and not getting anywhere. But as soon as the Detroit News created this app and individualized this harm, the entire city woke up and people were outraged. They took over the city hall yelling, cut the check, we want our money back. I've been in a lot of different protests. I've been in Toys in South Africa, but what happened that day at City Hall in Detroit when people found out how much they were individually overtaxed, it just takes the cake in terms of how to really communicate a message. Again, the lesson for me was individualize the harm and let people know how they were individually impacted. And that's what this fantastic series in the Detroit News did. All right. And I always like to say, there's lots, I want to make sure everyone understands that there are lots of reasons people go into property tax foreclosure, right? It could be because people are poor, a recent divorce, someone died. I mean, the reasons go on and on. So the challenge in this next study we did was to hold all those reasons constant to really isolate one variable of interest, which is these illegally inflated property tax assessments. We wanted to determine the effect of just that one variable on property tax foreclosure rates in Detroit. And we're able to say, again, using the most conservative estimates possible, that 10% of all property tax foreclosures would not have happened but for these illegally inflated property tax assessments. And when we just looked at that lowest quintile, which I showed you, remember quintile 1 and 2, 95% or more of the homes are being overassessed. So we look at just the lowest quintile, quintile 1, we're able to say that 1 in 4 of those properties would not have gone into property tax foreclosure, but for these illegally inflated property tax assessments. All right. So let me just back up and give you the whole picture in Detroit. All right. In Detroit, we have a situation where the city of Detroit was illegally inflating people's property tax assessments, leading to illegally inflated property taxes that people could not afford to pay, which then led to the highest number of property tax foreclosures in American history since the Great Depression. And the last piece of the puzzle, which I have not yet spoken about, is it was all for property taxes that most people were not supposed to be paying in the first place. What do I mean by that? Well, Detroit has, Michigan, has something called the poverty tax exemption, where you live in poverty, you're not supposed to be paying property taxes. But the city of Detroit made this entitlement so difficult to achieve that most people who were living below the poverty line, which is 40% of Detroiters live below the poverty line, by the way, were unable to access this entitlement. And what do I mean by they made it difficult to access? I mean, just simple things like not putting the application and information about the exemption on the website. But then there were more invidious things, like the city of Detroit set up a process where homeowners had to actually come downtown, and like any downtown, pay parking and, had to physically come downtown to fill out an application. And that application was for the office to then mail them an application for the property tax exemption. Yes, you heard me correctly. It's just as asinine as it sounds. They literally had to apply, come in person to apply in order to apply. So there were these nonsensical barriers being put up, again, for the explicit purpose of reducing the amount of people applying for the poverty tax exemption. And when I interviewed as part of my research project, these bureaucrats who erected all of these barriers. And for them, they were just trying to make, because they had an impossible job, and they were trying to make things easier on themselves and their particular bureaucracy, right? And so that was the logic, right? So their logic wasn't, we're trying to deny people, but the logic that they gave was they were trying to just make this impossible situation workable, right? Because they didn't have the staff or the resources they needed to service the population that was entitled. And so they made this crazy, very barrier-filled process. All right. So what's important is, Detroit is what I like to call ground zero for this issue of property tax injustice, but Detroit is by no means alone, okay? So this is not only a Detroit problem, this is a Wayne County problem. Wayne County is the county that Detroit sits in. So basically in Wayne County, there are 43 municipalities. 3 of them have a supermajority of Black people: Detroit, Inkster, and Highland Park, and 33 have a supermajority of white people, right? So in Wayne County, I used to live in Chicago, live and teach in Chicago, which I think, and again, being from LA, Chicago is one of the most segregated places I've ever stepped foot into. Honey, what's happening here in Wayne County puts whatever's happening to Chicago to shame. Black and white people in Wayne County do not live together, which is horrible for the world, but actually great for my study, because there is such a thing in this place called a Black city and a white city for me to compare. And when I compared the Black cities and the white cities, I found that number one, the rates of, you can see it, for foreclosure were, property tax foreclosure were extremely higher in the majority Black cities. And more importantly, the rate of illegally inflated property tax assessments, all 3 of the supermajority Black cities, Detroit, Inkster, and Highland Park, were experiencing these unconstitutional property tax assessments. But in the supermajority white cities, 91% of them were doing what they were supposed to do and assessing people in accordance with the Michigan state constitution. So these illegally inflated property taxes are racialized. And I always say that when people do work in Detroit and don't deal with race directly, they're doing everyone a disservice. And what we find, again, is the majority Black cities in Wayne County are being subjected to these illegally inflated property tax assessments and the resulting property tax foreclosures at a far greater rate than the majority white cities. All right, now this is not just a Detroit problem. This is not just a Wayne County problem. This is where you all come in. This is actually a national problem. What do I mean by this? Well, Carlos Avanasio Leon and True Power got their hands on some fantastic data, national data. And this study is really fantastic. If you haven't read The Assessment Gap, you need to read it. Hopefully, AJ, you can put that in the chat for them. But what this study finds, again, national study, is that Blacks and Hispanics pay on average a 10 to 13% higher property tax rate than whites for the same bundle of goods, which equals about $300 to $400 more per year. And when you look at a neighborhood that has more than the average number of Blacks or Latinos, these numbers go upward. So what we're finding is that these illegally inflated property taxes are a kind of silent driver of the racial wealth divide, a driver of the racial wealth divide that our country has not come to terms with. We have not yet had a national conversation about racialized property tax administration in America, but that's precisely the conversation that me and my colleagues are trying to initiate. All right, so remember I told you regressivity. So what we find here is Michigan is the second most regressive state in the union. And I say, and again, regressivity again means where the lower valued homes are taxed at a higher rate than the higher valued homes. And, Michigan is in trouble. When you're behind Alabama and ahead of Mississippi on any kind of racial justice issue, you are in trouble. So Michigan is in trouble, as you can see here. All right, so now this is the part that I'm really excited to talk to you all about, which is, all this data I just presented to you is very depressing. But what's not depressing is the fight back, is the resistance that's occurring. And the Coalition for Property Tax Justice has 3 goals, and we're working to really stop this property tax injustice at all three levels, right? So the first is we want to stop these illegally inflated property taxes. There we have a solution at the city level, the Detroit level, at the Michigan level, and then also at the federal level, which is where you all come in. So the solution at the city level is something called the Property Tax Appeal Project, which we started, where me and my law students, we file appeals for homeowners in the lowest valued homes. So there's a lot of, obviously, programs for low income home ownership. But one of the things we find is that the same organizations that are serving low income homeowners are not giving them any help with regards to property tax assessment appeals. When the data say that Black and brown individual homeowners are being assessed, at higher rates. And so the Property Tax Appeal Project, we have a project in Detroit, Chicago, and Milwaukee. And if you all are interested in having a property tax appeal project in your particular jurisdiction, please, AJ, if you could put your contact information in the chat, contact AJ, because our goal with the Property Tax Appeal Project is, again, those three models. We're creating three different models. The one in Detroit, we use community advocates to do the legal work. The one in Chicago, international law firm is doing the legal work. And the one in Milwaukee, a law school clinic, UW's clinic, is doing the legal work. So the idea is to create three pilots, three models. Eventually, we're going to, from these pilots, create a how-to kit, and then really give this out to other organizations, other housing organizations who want to integrate a property tax appeal project into the services they're already offering low-income homeowners. They'll be able to do this with ease and within a community of others who are doing the same. So again, if you're interested in this property tax appeal project, please, contact AJ and let us know. So, and the other thing we're doing at the Detroit level is we recently had a huge win in Detroit, which we basically created a property tax reform ordinance to, because, we call the property tax appeal project a bottom-up intervention, but the ordinance is really top-down to try and fix the systemic problems in Detroit. And in order to do this, me and one of our fellows, we took a 9-month class, and now I am sitting before you as a certified Michigan assessor. Honey, being a professor and then going back to school and becoming a student was one of the most humbling things I have done in a long time. But it was worth it, because now, knowing what's going on the inside, we were able to, through a series of community meetings, et cetera, create an ordinance that really fixed some of the fundamental problems that we found. And the Tuesday before Thanksgiving, a big miracle happened. We got that ordinance passed, which was 2 years of fighting the mayor, which is a whole other character, honey. We can talk about that offline. But we got it passed despite his opposition. So that's what's going on in terms of the city level. At the state level, Michigan, our solution there is Michigan basically already has an audit, but they are not collecting what we call the three most popular regressivity metrics. So the ways we measure regressivity. And so the solution at the state level is for them to start collecting the regressivity metrics, and to basically they already have corrective action plans if the various localities aren't meeting the rules, but to also put them on a corrective action plan if they're not meeting these regressivity metrics. So that's the solution we're proposing at the Michigan level. But the solution we're proposing at the federal level is where you all come in. We've already had our representative, Rashida Tlaib, has orchestrated 2 meetings already with Marcia Fudge and her team. And our solution is twofold. The first part of the solution is to create a database where anyone can hover over where they live and determine if they're being overassessed, or determine if there is regressivity in their jurisdiction. So this is not pie in the sky. The University of Chicago Center for Municipal Finance has already created one version of this. And so we just need to build upon that version and insert the racial data in there, which is what we're working on. But that's the first prong of the solution, is to create, again, an online platform where people can go to wherever you live in America to figure out if your particular jurisdiction is regressive. And AJ, again, if you could put on the chat the portal at the University of Chicago, so people, if you're interested in looking up wherever you live, to see if the property taxes in your jurisdiction are regressive, but it's to build on that. That's step one. Step two is even more important, which is the top 10% of kind of the most regressive states. Is we're asking HUD to put those particular jurisdictions on a 2-year corrective action plan. And it's not intended necessarily to be punitive, because a lot of these local assessors, what my research shows is they're not people who are evil, trying to overtax people. No, these are bureaucrats who are working with very limited resources. Many of them are using legacy systems from the frickin' 1970s. That aren't even using basic, regression analysis, the, basic quantitative tools that have developed over the years, they're not using. And so the corrective action plan would really be HUD providing these localities, these particularly troubled localities, with technical assistance to help them meet the mark. And so that's the two-prong proposal we're putting forth to HUD. And what we're doing now, and which is why NCST has invited me here today, is the various housing organizations. We're trying to get them to sign on to this first of all, to get involved in amending, because we're still in the process of tinkering with the solution and adding things. So getting involved in adding your comments to this two-pronged solution, number one, and number two, to see if your organization will sign on. And even more, if you know other housing organizations that you can put us in touch with to get them to sign on to this national solution. Again, if your organization is willing, or we want to talk about you signing on, or if you can help us get in touch with other housing organizations to sign on to this proposal, please contact AJ. We would love your help on this issue. Again, this property tax regressivity is a national racial justice issue that our country has not yet started to reckon with, and we need your help. Detroit is ground zero, but this is not by any means just a Detroit problem. This is a national problem that we need your help in solving. So I have two other things, but Raquel, I think maybe I should stop now to give us enough time for questions, or can I keep moving?
You know what? We have enough time for you to keep moving, and we will, after that, we can stop for questions if that's okay.
Okay. So good. So, but what I told you is the main part, but I do want to just give you, so there are two other goals as well that we have for the Coalition for Property Tax Justice. One goal is to stop these foreclosures. So although we have all this empirical proof that, people are being overassessed, the mayor and the local politicians say, well, if people believe that they were being overassessed, then they should have filed an appeal. The problem with that logic is appeals are created for, in any mass proper system, you're going to get some things wrong, right? And so an appeal is to correct those things. But when you're talking about up to 85%, when the city got up to 85% of the property tax assessments wrong, an appeal process is not what is required to fix it, right? But that's where we are in Detroit, is that now, this powerful failure of personal responsibility narrative is doing big work to now say, oh, it's not the city's problem, it's the homeowners' problem for sleeping on their rights and for not filing this property tax appeal. So that's how in Detroit these foreclosures are still happening. But we have some solutions, and we've been, again, the fight back is real here in Detroit. Number one is we had, the COVID money came in, and we're using some of those dollars to pay these back property tax debt. And that was not an easy fight. All of this we have, again, people at the local level who are writing letters, attending meetings, making phone calls, et cetera. So there's a lot of pressure in terms of passing that property tax reform ordinance. And there's a lot of pressure, like for instance, MISTA, which is a Michigan State Housing Authority, when they got this COVID money, they made some random rules saying that they're only paying property tax debt from 2020 and forward. We did the research and found that there was no such restriction at the federal level. MISTA had just made that up themselves. And so through a community action campaign, we put pressure on MISTA and they changed the rule to match the federal rule, which is this money can be used to pay all property tax debt, past debt, and not just from 2020 forward. So that's just an example of the kinds of work that we're doing through grassroots action to find solutions to this property tax inequity. All right, and then our last goal, so the coalition has 3 goals just to situate us. The first is to stop these illegally inflated property taxes. The second is to stop these foreclosures, property tax foreclosures from happening. And the third and final is about compensation. So I always like to say, you can't just be, have all this verified empirical information about illegally inflated property taxes and talk about some, oops, I'm sorry. No, we need compensation. And so there is something called the Dignity Restoration Project, which we created here in Detroit as a national model for reparations. So, one of the things with this reparations debate is it gets really slippery real quickly, whether you're starting from slavery or whether you're talking about Jim Crow. My argument is this: let's not start at slavery or Jim Crow. Let's start it yesterday. Okay, when they were stealing. And that's what's happening right here in Detroit. Let's start the reparations conversation from the present to the past. So let's start with the theft that's happening currently right under our noses in Detroit, and then use that to build momentum for the theft that has been happening, the property tax dispossession that has been happening in years prior. And I think it's very important to understand what's happening in Detroit as not some isolated incident, but as part of a longer history of Black land dispossession that has been happening in America. It starts with slavery, right? But, racial zoning, racially restrictive covenants, urban renewal, block busting, redlining, illegally, predatory mortgage lending. And now we're coming to these illegally inflated property taxes. It is very important to contextualize this so that, again, when we talk about reparations, which is what we're doing in Detroit, and so how we're starting the reparations in Detroit is what we call with the hardest hit, and this is the last thing I'll say before I open this up for questions, is in the hardest hit in Detroit, we define as people who were overassessed, foreclosed upon, for taxes they weren't supposed to be paying in the first place because they qualified for the poverty tax exemption. That's the first group of people that we are trying to compensate. And we know at the very beginning, we can never compensate people for what was lost, because houses are more than just bricks and mortar, right? If you had your house foreclosed upon, that means it was a paid off house, because if the bank was involved and there was a mortgage, the bank would step in. But a lot of these homes are paid off homes. And in my interviews, people are crying, telling me, I lost mama's home, I lost granddaddy's home, right? And so, when we are doing the the reparations program or the compensation program, we can never compensate people for what they lost. But it is that is not an excuse not to do anything, right? So we are realizing that the compensation we're putting forth is symbolic, but it is a start, and that's what we are trying to do. So that is just a little taste. Obviously, in this short amount of time, I couldn't give you the whole spectrum of what we're doing as a coalition, but I hopefully gave you all a good idea. And again, I just want to stop and reiterate the role for you all outside of Detroit, which is helping us with this national solution. And we would appreciate any help you could give us. Thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to the Q&A.
Incredible. Thanks so much, Professor Atuahene. And we do have a few questions in the Q&A, so I'll go ahead and just go through those now with you. Please, for everyone else, if you have questions, go ahead and drop them in the Q&A for us to review. So the first one comes in from Duffy Westheimer. Are the assessments based on zoning entitlements is the question there. Are the assessments based on zoning entitlements?
It has nothing to do with zoning. So an assessment is basically, in Michigan, it's different in different places, but in Michigan, the assessed value of your home can be no more than 50% of its market value. So if a home is worth $200,000, the assessed value cannot be more than $100,000. So it's based, the assessed value has nothing to do with zoning. It has everything to do with the value of your property. And I like to say that the difference between sales tax and property tax is important, because with the sales tax, you buy the thing, and so you know how much it's worth and you're taxed accordingly. With property taxes, the home doesn't sell every year. And so these are estimates of what your property is worth. And that's where we get into trouble, is these estimates tend to be incorrect for Black and Hispanic homes, right? And this is where I want to just stop to talk about what we call the double bind, because many of you have probably heard a whole lot about appraisals, right? Because in appraisals, we're having the exact opposite issue. With appraisals, you heard about this professor in Baltimore who tried to sell his home, and then he removed everything Black, his family's picture, and put the white pictures of his colleague, and then it sold for hundreds of thousands of dollars more. And we have other studies coming in behind that, this kind of individualized data to say that this is a systemic issue. So while in the area of appraisals, Black and brown homes are being undervalued, in the area of property taxes, our homes are being overvalued. And that's what we call the double bind. And so that's the issue that we're facing today in America.
Thank you for that. I'll go on to the next question here from Patricia Duarte. Great work, first of all. Property taxes help pay for some services, and unfortunately, low income have paid more for the services. The impact of loss of revenue could have unintended consequences. Any thoughts how to address that issue when it comes up?
Yeah, I mean, this is so that's exactly the problem with regressivity, right? And because when a jurisdiction is regressive, you're having the lower valued homes being overtaxed, but more importantly, you're having the higher valued homes being undertaxed. And as the questioner has pointed out, those are lost taxes, right? When you're undertaxing the higher valued homes, and which is less taxes for schools and snow cleaning and all the things that we use these property taxes for. So again, the solution, which we're pushing for, again, at these various levels, is to get the taxes right. And when you get the taxes right, one of the kind of pushbacks we're experiencing at the state of Michigan level is the localities are like, well, what are going to be the consequences? And, and I like to tell people, number one, two things. Like, they're worried about getting less revenue. And I'm like, number one, you need to follow the law and stop talking about more or less revenue is irrelevant. You need to follow the law. But number two, by getting the property taxes correctly, you may actually see, like lots of jurisdictions, an increase in your net yield because these jurisdictions are undertaxing the higher valued homes. So, that's what that's the situation there. But yeah, that's the answer to that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. The next one is from Rob Finn. Are you supportive of the movement towards shifting Detroit's property tax system to a land value tax system?
Yeah, Rob, thanks for that. So, there's something in Detroit called the Land Value Tax Plan. And just for those of you who aren't familiar with it, what that basically does is the goal is to raise the taxes on vacant land, right? So people who are, there's a lot of speculators in Detroit who are just kind of holding vacant land. And so the idea is to raise the taxes on the vacant land, and then using that to lower the taxes on homes with a house on it. All right, so that's the kind of general idea. And on its face, it sounds like, good sense, but there's a couple of problems with it. Number one, the point is, the idea is by raising the taxes on vacant land, the idea is to get them to use the land more productively. But when you look at on the ground what the actual increase is, so that the vacant land, the taxes go from them paying, $150 a year to $300 a year, right? So the actual increases are not enough to make people change the behavior. So that's one problem. The second problem is this land value tax plan requires doing separate assessments for the land and then the improvement. That's all just to say it requires a bureaucracy that's sophisticated. And what I've just described to you in Detroit is an assessment division that is in shambles. I've just described to you an assessment division that is currently not doing its job. And so my position has been, before we move to any land value tax plan, we've got to fix the current problem, because the lowest valued homes in Detroit are still being assessed in violation of the Michigan State Constitution. So first, you've got to fix that problem before you can move to this next thing, which is more complicated and requiring more resources, et cetera, of this very same bureaucracy. So this is, to me, one of the challenges of policymaking, right? Some people want to make policies that are far beyond where their capabilities of the bureaucracies. A great policy, poorly implemented, is a poor policy. So that's how I feel about the land value tax plan. I think it has some very good bones, but at this moment in Detroit, the assessment division just has shown it does not have the capacity to implement it properly. So that's my assessment.
Okay, we've got a couple more both comment and questions coming up. This is a comment from Camilla Lewis. No question. I think she has one coming up, but just wanted to say how much your work has inspired her. So she's just wanting to share her thanks for that. Quentin A has a question. So thank you for this presentation and congratulations on becoming an assessor. How is this information about the coalition getting out to other communities? Are the assessors associations, if there is one, do they know about this?
That's so we've tried to, so there is the International Association of Assessing Officers, IAAO. We've tried to give presentations at that conference. Let me just be political and say we've had a cold reception. Okay, let me leave it there. But yeah, very cold reception. At the end of the day, you've been doing something one way for 20, 30 years. A lot of these assessors have been for 20, 30 years. And here come these people talking about regressivity and, and so, there's a lot of natural resistance to change. And I think that's what we are experiencing. But again, what we're trying to do is we're not waiting for the assessors to change. Change doesn't happen from those in the bureaucracy or those in power. Change happens from below. And that's exactly what we're leading the way in Detroit, is to show how to use people power to get this stuff done, right? Again, when we pass this ordinance, AJ, you want to come on and say the statistics about how many people, just to give you a real solid about what the organizing looks like to get the assessment passed. AJ, are you there? You want to come on camera and give them some of the numbers in terms of the actions that people took? That's how change happens, is through organizing. When you have, we call it the Holy Trinity at the coalition. When you have the research, with the community organizing and the litigation, because that's a whole other thing I haven't even talked about yet, is the litigation. That's how you can produce lasting change. AJ, you want to give them an idea of what that organizing looked like for the ordinance?
Yeah, definitely. So we had a core group of actually folks who'd been impacted by overassessment, who have named their group. It sort of came together naturally, the Homekeeper Warriors, and so they played a really big role in engaging supporters and developing the strategy for our campaign. And then in addition to that, we had folks write 4,200 letters to city council. We made over 300 calls to city councilors. We collected over 2,000 signatures for petitions. We had hundreds of people show up at public comment. And we must have had dozens of meetings with city councilors as well. So it was a long effort, but obviously a fruitful one.
And the thing that, we learned here in Detroit, it was what won the day is our persistence. We didn't, a lot of these local campaigns, they start and they run out of gas. We were there. We've been since 2017, we've been working on this issue very consistently. And these politicians realize we're not going anywhere until we get justice. And with the years, the people behind us just kept building and building. And that's how change is produced. And how we plan to spread this is, again, we want to fix this at the national level through the two-pronged policy I described to you. But the next thing we're going to do is we are going, again, the rollout of our property tax appeal project. Again, we're in Detroit, Chicago, and Milwaukee, and we're going to do one new city a year. And so we're trying to evaluate, again, our requirement, because we know it's Black and brown people being overassessed. So a city with a high number of Blacks or Hispanics. And so we're adding one city a year. And that's how you all can be helpful. If you know a very strong housing organization that would like to start servicing, who already serve, because we're not trying to recreate the wheel. We're looking for organizations that are already servicing low-income homeowners and want to add this as an additional service to the suite of services that are already being offered. If you know of one of those organizations, again, contact AJ. We would love to think about coming to your city next with our property tax appeal project. But that's how we plan to kind of expand this to the other cities. So that was a great question. Thank you for that.
Yes. Yeah, we've got two more quick ones, and I think that'll wrap up the Q&A. This next one, again, from Cam. Well, this is a question from Cam Lewis. You pointed out that this analysis was simplified in Detroit because of the state law, which clearly prohibits taxes higher than 50% of the assessed value. How do you determine overtaxation in locations where the law is not structured like this?
Yeah. I mean, that's what makes it so. I mean, there are other ways to do it. If you're interested in Chicago, the Chicago Tribune had a series called The Tax Divide. I think it was a 3 to 5 part series, and it was actually nominated for the Pulitzer. And it shows how this very same issue turns up in Chicago. And so Chicago, again, is not, like in Michigan, we have the state constitution that says no property can be assessed at more than 50% of the market value. Chicago doesn't have that, but there are still ways of determining regressivity. And again, going through those articles, you can, you can make the case. But, all it means is in Michigan, we have a clear case to say it's unconstitutional, illegal, which is a powerful claim to be made. But in other places like Chicago, you might not be able to say it's unconstitutional, but you can still say it's inequitable. And your fight can be based on that inequity, which is different than illegality. And that's what the fight in Chicago has been about. It's been about inequity versus the fight in Michigan because of the provision, which is one about unconstitutional, which is a bigger, more profound claim. But that doesn't mean that there are not claims to be made in other jurisdictions. But that's a great question.
And thank you for that. And the last one here is from Chris Roselot. Incredible work and presentation, first of all. Sorry if I missed this, but how often do assessments occur in Michigan? We are an absolute mess here in Allegheny County, Pennsylvania. It's been over 10 years since our last countywide.
Yeah. In Michigan, they're actually required to do assessments every year. In Cook County, they do assessments every 3rd year. And I believe in Madison, Wisconsin, it's something similar to Allegheny where, you know, they could just do little adjustments and go for 10 years or so without doing. So it's just different in different jurisdictions. So, you know, again, it's different in different jurisdictions, but in everywhere, no matter when they kind of do the reassessments, I feel like in places like Allegheny County and, well, Madison actually is doing a pretty good job. But in places like Allegheny, if you believe in Allegheny County, you know, there's a lot of regressivity. That's the place, and they don't like in Michigan, they do it every year. But, you know, that's especially the place that's needed. A property tax appeal project is needed. That's a place where the local housing organizations really do need to fold in a property tax appeal project. Because they're not, you know, doing these reassessments often enough, and that means it's incumbent upon the homeowner to make sure that they're being assessed properly. And as we all know, Black and brown homeowners, poor homeowners are poorly situated to be understanding and filing all these appeals. Ain't nobody got time for all that, you know, filing an appeal. And no, just get it right. Right? Because people have families and caretaking obligations, and this stuff is so dense and complicated that people can't understand what's going on. So I would just say that, again, the property tax appeal project is really best situated for that kind of situation where the reassessments happens so infrequently.
Right. Maybe that's your next city, right? One of your next cities could be.
Maybe it is. That's
that
right.
county. Well,
Yes.
again, thank you so much, Professor Atuahene. It has been a pleasure having you on. We're heading into our policy updates with Elizabeth Coates, and feel free to stay around and listen to those as well. And then we'll wrap it up. Elizabeth, please.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much. And thanks so much to our special guests for the incredibly igniting presentation. In the spirit of coalition building, I will just share a little bit of an update regarding the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act. For those of you who are aware of our work at NCST, we co-chair the Neighborhood Homes Coalition. And this is our advocacy arm to ensure that we have as swift of passage as is practicable within a split Congress. That's always very difficult. And if you were speaking to me maybe even 2 weeks ago, I might have not had nearly as positive of an outlook for passage as I can bring to you today. But according to lots of different discussions on the Hill, both in the House and the Senate, there is some appetite to actually move a tax package forward. Most prominent being changes to and enhancements to the child tax credit, as well as some components regarding research and development tax credit elements as well. So with that, now the tax conversation is sort of opened up a little bit more to be able to consider other tax elemented. I think I paused, but here we go. All right, my connection is back. There are certainly opportunities to be able to push for additional tax items underneath the tax writer's jurisdiction. So the Neighborhood Homes Coalition has been pushing hard, having good discussions on both on the Senate Finance Committee side with Democrats there that are in leadership, as well as the House Ways and Means leadership under Chairman Jason Smith, who is the lead Republican. And both of them have said that there is a priority to include housing within whatever a tax package might be included. Now, of course, it's going to be much easier for the changes to the existing low-income housing tax credit to be adopted for a quick extenders package. However, that does not mean that we cease our drumbeat for leading neighborhood homes to be a part of that package as well. Chairman Jason Smith's office told us just a few weeks ago that she is so reassured that we are moving forward on a federal tax element to be able to push affordable home ownership. So the support is there. We've had lots of great press, in fact, in regarding this legislation as well. Our own NCST's president, Chris Tyson, was featured in a Mortgage Professionals America magazine article that you can see online, pushing for passage. Additionally, we also have former Senator Portman, as well as the chair of LISC and former Treasury official Robert Rubin. They penned an op-ed together to be able to push for passage as well, really highlighting the importance of the bipartisan nature that is behind the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act. So that is the work that we are doing there. We are looking for this tax package to come together in mid-January. Many of you might know that the continuing resolution, at least the first phase of the government funding process, will come to a close in mid-January. And that means that there is certainly opportunity for additional legislative action there. So that is definitely our biggest push as we close the end of the year. We've had lots of other exciting updates. Additionally to growing our Homeownership Alliance, we are actively recruiting for 2024 members. You can see on the website that I've shared all the work that we've been doing, be that through comment letters as well as other legislative strategies. If you are a nonprofit organization interested in expanding your advocacy capabilities in the field of affordable homeownership, please talk to me. Please join our coalition. Please let's discuss how we can ensure that you can bring enhanced resources to your communities to ensure that the American dream of homeownership is available to everyone. Thanks so much, Raquel, and thanks for everyone for joining today.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Always good to hear from you on what's going on in Washington, D.C. So that's it, folks, for today. Thank you for being here. We want to wish you all a wonderful holiday season. We'll be back in January on the 17th with the 2024 economic forecast, which will be presented by the chief economist of the Mortgage Bankers Association, Michael Frantantoni. So with that, we bid you adieu, and we will see you again soon. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.